It's going to be cited.
Yeah, but you won't do anything.
Well,
You'll wrap his knuckles.
I wouldn't sit on that.
Good morning. The Attorney General of British Columbia has responded to lobbying from specific interest groups like Mothers Against Drunk Driving, Citizens United for Safety and Justice, and is introducing a scheme whereby the impact of a crime on a victim will be presented to a court before sentencing. Is that bad or is that good? Here's some of what, there's a form going to be filled out at the moment and presented to the judge. Here's part of what the Attorney General said yesterday in his press conference in Victoria.
We do not see this, incidentally, as an inflammatory matter. We don't see it as evidence under oath that's given in court. We see it as being presented professionally by a prosecutor to the court to assist the court in sentencing. We believe for it to be effective that there will have to be an amendment to the Criminal Code of Canada that requires the court to consider this, not to act on it, but to consider it. We also think to be effective that ultimately there will need to be an amendment to the Parole Act so that it will be a matter that the parole board must consider at the time of release as well.
And this morning we're going to find out what one of the leading practitioners of the defense role in the bar has to think of this, H.A.D. Oliver of Vancouver. On the program today too, we're going to look at the 16th day of the starvation strike by Senator H.A.D, who is fighting for the revival of youth employment through Katimavik. And here's what he said yesterday.
Is it Katimavik or nothing?
Oh yes, if you want to put it that way, it's Katimavik or nothing.
And in the studio to give her point of view is Mary Collins, the Conservative MP for Capilano, who has been very active in a role to try and help the incredible youth unemployment in Canada. Maybe the senator will end his life on the floor of the Senate. And then, towards the end of the program this morning, we're going to meet the man who was the coroner in Vancouver and in British Columbia for some 26 years. I think I'll show a famous picture with which he was involved. That was in October 1959, when the famous Errol Flynn died in Vancouver and caused quite a stir. But there are many other instances that I want to talk to Coroner Glen McDonald about on the program this morning. But first off the top, H.A.D. Oliver on Brian Smith's new plan for victim impact studies to be presented to the court after the break. H.A.D. Oliver is one of the leading defense counsel in British Columbia. Mr. Oliver, you've heard about Mr. Smith's scheme and how this form is going to be filled out as to the impact on the victim. Is that not eminently fair that the judge before sentencing should be able to consider the grief and the damage and the injury to the party who is affected by the criminal? Is this not a step forward to more enlightened sentencing?
It's a step sideways. There are three things which the judge must take into consideration in sentencing: the protection of society, deterrence, and rehabilitation. Those only are the proper factors. Vengeance in any form has nothing to do with it at all.
Are you suggesting to me, therefore, that an impact study, I think the first plan was that the actual victim of the crime, if alive, would appear in court. Would that in any way have been satisfactory?
No.
But surely the victim gives evidence from time to time in many cases.
Oh, yes. But the victim gives evidence about what happened, how the offense was committed, but of what real importance is the effect on the victim. If you and I go out and get drunk and drive our cars, you hit a pedestrian and I don't, should I really receive a lower sentence than you? I don't think so at all. This is a complete red herring. the Attorney General's usual logical thought processes seem to have forsaken him at this time.
Well, let me take the point of view of an ordinary member of the public, though. If you go out and drive your car when you're drunk and merely hit a lamp standard, and I go out and hit my car when I'm drunk and I don't kill somebody, but I severely injure them, should my sentence not be, in any event, heavier than your sentence because by happenstance I caused human damage?
The answer is no. You've given me the answer yourself by the use of the words by happenstance. You and I could both reasonably foresee that we would hit somebody in our drunken state. You and I should be punished to the same degree.
But then again, let's go further with the drunken driving. If I do hit someone and kill them, and you committing the same offense, drunken driving or impaired driving to some extraordinary extent, I am going to necessarily get a heavier sentence, am I not?
Well, you should not get necessarily a heavier sentence. What should happen is that you're then sued for damages by the family of the victim who have suffered as a result of your misdeeds.
In other words, you would leave that entirely to the civil side of the law.
To the civil side, which is geared to the provision of compensation to people who have been damaged and hurt and deprived and injured. Vengeance in the criminal justice system doesn't take the place of compensation.
Nor grief.
No grief, indeed.
But I saw a case the other day where a man who had robbed a bank and had only recovered $7,000 had to find the extra $190,000 and give it back.
Yes.
Is that not the same kind of parallel of using the criminal courts for a civil recovery?
Well, that is restitution. If I rob you and I'm found with your gold watch in my pocket, I can be ordered to give it back, and rightly so. I can't be ordered to give back the life, the happiness of the victim, and the only effect of what the Attorney General now proposes is to inflame the court. The Attorney General says we don't want to do that. What then?
In fact, you're saying that the measure of these impact statements will be that the courts may on some occasions be inflamed by something not normally allowed into a criminal trial.
I can't understand what other purpose they would serve unless it be to act as a safety valve for the pent-up feelings of the victim. And I'm afraid that our criminal justice system is too expensive to operate to allow us to extend the length of a trial for another hour at a cost of another $650 or whatever in order to relieve the feelings of the victim.
Pretend for a moment I'm Crown Counsel, and you're the defense counsel, and I say, here is an impact statement on what this dreadful man who has been found guilty has done to this family. He wrecked the family, he bankrupted the family. Would you necessarily be bound to allow that statement to go in unchallenged?
No. Any unsworn material introduced by the Crown on sentencing may only be relied upon by the court if it is admitted by the defense. If the defense challenge it, then you may decide either to abandon it or to call evidence to support your allegations. And when you get that, when you get evidence called on sentencing, you run into the sort of situation that's been going on in a case which has been before the Supreme Court of British Columbia for many, many weeks now, where hundreds of thousands of dollars of public funds are spent to assist the court in determining what sentence to
So
impose.
what you're saying, perhaps you won't be quite as blunt as my question, but what you're saying is that the Attorney General of British Columbia is responding emotionally to pressure on him from decent people who have suffered grievously and want to see much heavier sentences in certain kinds of cases, rape, drunken driving, homicide on the highways. Is that what he's doing?
He is acting like any responsible Attorney General with an election coming up.
That's fair enough. In other words, here I am with my statement again, and I present it to the judge. You can't cross-examine me on it at all, can you?
That's right.
But you can object to it.
I can object to it.
Take it away, it's not proven.
That is correct. And the judge may not then rely upon it.
The Attorney General did say this morning that he plans to seek an amendment to the Criminal Code. Would that mean, is that a radical amendment to the Criminal Code?
I think it would be regarded as such by the federal government. Good luck to him.
But what are the chances of it passing, in fact?
Very limited, I would imagine.
Is it really an effort, though? Will it have the effect of having an effort on the judge, telling the judge, the Attorney General thinks you should know all the gruesome details so that regardless of the form of offence, you make it the heaviest possible sentence?
I don't think that that belongs into the system at all. That does not fall in within any of the criteria which the courts have laid down for sentencing.
And you're taking, therefore, this morning, H.A.D. Oliver, QC, a very, very antipathetic stance to those people who want to see heavy sentences for specific crimes, regardless of the circumstances.
I want to see the most effective deterrent in every case, as does every responsible member of the bar, and this isn't the way to set about it.
And the judges have enough power as is?
That is correct.
On the evidence in front of them without any impact statements?
That is right.
Well, we might hear from some callers on this morning to H.A.D. Oliver after the break. Phones up. I suspect, Mr. Oliver, that you will have taken a highly unpopular view. I don't know, I haven't checked any of the calls, but let's find out. Go ahead to H.A.D. Oliver.
Hi, I was calling, my brother was killed by a drunk driver.
Yeah?
And you can't, he was a single person. He didn't have any children or was married. You can't sue civilly. By the legal statutes in British Columbia and the ICBC, you can't sue civilly. There's no civil recourse.
Okay. Is there civil recourse in the rough circumstances like that? A single man, no dependents?
No, not in those circumstances.
And that's quite simple.
That's simple enough.
That's quite simple. So how can he justify saying that there shouldn't be a bigger sentence?
We were talking about the victims of crime. It was your brother who was the victim of crime, and it's most unfortunate that one cannot compensate him.
No, that's right. If he'd been a married man with children, his wife would have had an action at law for civil compensation.
That is correct.
The loss of his... I'm very sorry, sir. Go ahead, please.
Yes, I have a theoretical question to ask that has some minimal application to what you're talking about. The question is, I am a person who extorts another person. I tell them that if they don't comply with my demands, pay me money, I will run them over in a vehicle. Then the insurance on the vehicle, they call me on the criminal side, will be null and void because it was a crime I committed to knock them down. So I tell them, if I run you over, most likely you're going to have to call it an accident in order to collect for the damages to be looked after physically. For instance, you're put in a wheelchair, something like that, then you must call me on the accident side.
Well, just a minute. You're looking for an accident claim. You're not worried about the impact study of the offense that the man committed.
Well,
does that make any sense to you, Bert?
It sounds like a most interesting scenario for a television series.
But hardly practical.
I don't think so.
Except if I am committed, if I do commit a crime with a motor vehicle, my insurance doesn't cover me, does it?
Not generally speaking.
Not generally speaking. Too hypothetical for us, old boy. Go ahead, please.
Mr. Oliver, I'd like to compliment you. I think that the stand that you're taking in this particular matter is a logical stand. I think the Attorney General has overstepped his boundaries, and I think you're dead on by saying that there is likely an election coming up, in the future. I think that this is what he's shooting at, and I think he's just trying to win the sympathy of the general public.
I think that's a very legitimate thing for any politician to do.
But not necessarily legally desirable from the point of view of the proper operation of the courts.
No, that is, of course, the problem any Attorney General finds himself in.
Go ahead, please.
Mr. Oliver.
Yep.
You spoke earlier of protecting the public and rehabilitation. Now, I'm wondering, from the gist of what you've been speaking of this morning, I see that capital punishment would be totally contradictory to your ideas. Is this correct?
I don't know if that's what we're talking about, but certainly if capital punishment were a deterrent, I'd be for it.
But you do not regard capital punishment as a deterrent?
Oh, I think all the studies of the past 35 years have shown, unfortunately, that it is not.
Give me again the third principle on which judges sentences. One's the protection of the public.
The second is deterrence.
And the third?
And the third is rehabilitation.
Rehabilitation. Go ahead from Campbell River.
Yes, Jack. I'm finding it very hard to sit here and listen to this man. I was a passenger in a car in '82 where my daughter was the driver, and we were hit by a drunk driver who ran a stop sign. It was Easter weekend, obviously close to the time of year it is now, and it is difficult for me. Impact statements would be very, very, very important as far as I'm concerned. And that statement of a near election coming on, I find very, very, I haven't got words that I can say.
You don't like it. Mr. Oliver?
I can understand this lady's feelings. They're the natural feelings of the relative of anybody who has been killed. But what purpose would she serve with an impact statement? Is the purpose to inflame the court? If so, obviously any judge would reject it.
Can I interrupt here?
Yes, you may.
It's not that to inflame the court. I would like to see people that have had impaired charges. We've had impaired charges in the family as well. And you don't get home to anybody until they are forced. And to see that they can go with an ambulance crew to accident scenes. These shows that I saw on Channel 9 about victims of...
Oh, yes, ma'am, that's well understood, but the point truly is that it's up to the courts to administer the punishments properly, even without impact studies.
That is correct, properly and according to law. And I agree totally with this lady, but not that there's any deterrent value in this. I'm an advocate of lifetime suspensions of driver's licenses for impaired drivers on their first offense. There's a deterrent for you.
Mm-hmm. Taking them away forever. Go ahead, please.
Good morning. I was just wanting to make a point, like everybody seems to be talking about, you know, motor vehicles and whatnot. And I'm sitting here thinking about someone that I know that's sitting waiting for trial at the beginning of April for a murder case. And the people's lives that this one man has just destroyed is ridiculous, and I think the victims must have a say. I also feel that the capital punishment should be brought back, the same as like the dogs that maimed the little boy.
Okay, leave the capital punishment at the moment. Here we have a gruesome murder trial. What difference would an impact statement of the effect of a murder in a family make to the sentencing by the judge? And you notice that Smith's talking about a change in the Parole Act for some reason.
I don't see that an impact statement would serve any useful purpose.
Maximum sentence is brought forward on these people that figure, you know, they don't even think about their actions before they even...
True enough, but what happens in a murder trial where it's perfectly clear that there's a premeditated plan or a contract or a hit? Or...
In that case, when one is convicted of capital murder, sentenced to imprisonment for life with no parole eligibility for the next 25 years. And an impact statement would make no impact, one way or the other.
Matter of fact, an impact statement in a simple killing, of which there are some, might have had a more grievous effect than an impact statement in a contract or some particularly gruesome meditated murder, right?
Yes, the circumstances in which the offense is committed, that is the important thing, rather than the results which may or may not have been foreseen or foreseeable.
Your position is logical, but it's not politically popular. Go ahead, please.
Yes, good morning, gentlemen. Mr. Oliver, how do you rationalize the inconsistencies in sentencing by judges?
I think that we have, in the provincial court, for instance, 105 judges sitting in this province and 105 courts. They are human beings. They apply their common sense, their knowledge of the law, their human feelings to the circumstances of the case before them and the circumstances of the particular case, having regard to the background of the accused. Human beings are live people.
And would not the impact studies report assist the judge to come closer to some consistency in their sentencing?
No. There is a striving for consistency in any event. The judges receive sentencing statistics, computerized sentencing statistics. They hold sentencing seminars from time to time. They go to great trouble to pursue consistency, but consistency is not the prime requisite. It is one of a number of things a judge must consider.
And I'm supposed to that they're guided on occasion by appeal verdicts which say, hey, you were too soft in that, hit it harder.
That is correct.
But you stand by your position, Mr. Oliver, that there is an element of politicking and responding to kind of rearrange the criminal sentencing situation by impact studies from victims.
That is correct, but to me, politics is not a dirty word.
My thanks to H.A.D. Oliver. Next, and politics again will not be a dirty word, with Mary Collins, the Tory MP for Capilano, after the break. Much of the attention in Canada today is centered on Senator H.A.D, who is now in the 16th day of his mineral water-only hunger strike in the lobby of the Senate. And as you saw him say on television this morning, it's Katimavik or nothing. Now, here is a Conservative MP backbench. The first time you've been in my program, is it not?
Right,
and I do apologize for that neglect on my part. Mary Collins from Capilano. Now, you're concerned with youth unemployment. Is it not a fact that your government will have to bend to the possibility of the starvation death of H.A.D if he keeps it up, and bring back Katimavik?
No, we can't do that.
Why not?
Because that would mean that blackmail works, and that totally undermines our democratic institutions and society.
But with 700,000 unemployed youth in the country, has it not been a very good way to rivet attention on this problem and make your government do more than it has already done?
Well, let me tell you that we have been doing a lot. In fact, in the past year, we've spent over $750 million on various programs to help young people find jobs. About 256,000 young people have been involved in those. And they're programs which I feel are a lot more effective.
They're not nearly as visible, going back a few years, as the crafty old Liberals were when they lashed out their LIP programs, their LEAP programs, their centre programs, their money without end, amen, which at least pacified the unemployed youth of the 60s, did it not?
Well, maybe acronyms may be popular, but results, I think, are what it's all about. Now, I've been involved in the job entry program in my own riding, where young people who've been out of school, really have no training, sort of no hope, no skills in terms of how to go about getting a job. Through North Shore Continuing Education, they're in there for a period of between 32, 52 weeks doing classroom. Then they go out to an employer. They get experience on the job in a, depending on what program
But
they're
how
in.
many jobs, say, in your riding? How many jobs have you created in your riding?
Well, these people are still in the training component, and then at the end of it, hopefully they'll be able to get jobs. And what's happening, because I've talked to the employers where they're getting the work experience, and they're really pleased with them because they, and a lot of them have already been offered jobs. And that's the approach we should be taking, giving these young people the confidence and the experience through these sorts of programs.
But if I may push it a little bit, how many people are on job training in your riding?
In my riding, there would be, I think, around 200 at the moment. Across Canada, in all of those kinds of programs, there have been 256,000. There are only 2,000 young people involved in Katimavik. It was a very small program in terms of the numbers of young people who
Well,
are
it's a lack
affected
of your, my lack of knowledge is abysmal on this. I know about the job training, but do they go back to school or do they go somewhere else, and do you pay them while they're getting this training?
It's a combination, which I think is what's really important. They get the classroom part of it, plus the actual work experience. They may be in the classroom for, say, 8 to 10 weeks, learning those skills, getting the works, life skills as well, because a lot of the kids,
and do you pay them while they're doing this?
They're on unemployment insurance or a special training allowance.
So they get something for that.
They get something while they're
and
doing
hopefully, you say 256,000 of them.
In the variety of different kinds of programs which the government has. But there's been all sorts of efforts. In fact, youth unemployment has come down, much more in the last 18 months than it had previously. We're spending more money on youth employment programs in the past year than the Liberals, way more than the Liberals did when youth employment was up at 20% back in 82, 83. Mm-hmm. And
would you concede, would you plead guilty to the fact that the Tories' plans for youth have not become visible in the way that Katimavik was visible. For instance, they only got $1 a day, but they got their food and their keep and their travel and a few months here and a few months there, and they kept kids on the move. You don't like these kind of schemes?
Well, you got to look at the cost effectiveness of it all. I mean, that's what we're trying to do is make every dollar count in our government. And I've got nothing against Katimavik. I think for many young people enjoyed that experience. I've talked to a number of people who were through it. But it didn't necessarily help them get a job in the long term.
No.
And it was an interesting experience, but we think we can do better. We think we can have programs that are really more effective in helping young people go into long-term employment.
If some youth in this area wants a job training program now, can you help them, or have they got to go through Manpower?
They go through Manpower through the special youth employment program offices in the Manpower centers.
And you
that's
tell me it
actually where
works.
they
You just
apply.
haven't publicized it very much indeed.
Well, actually on the North Shore, we've had a lot of publicity. The local paper there was very good. They had programs and we had lots of applicants when the program started a couple of months ago.
You were a kind of surprise candidate and a surprise winner, and you ran on women's rights, and I presume you're one of these great advocates of women's combat roles in the military. Of course you are. You must be, are you?
Listen, let me come down to what it's all about. I don't think that women should arbitrarily be excluded from anything just because we're women. It should be, there's certain skills required for a job. The people that have those skills, whether they're black or white or women or men, should be able to apply for them. What we want to do is break down those sort of barriers that really had no justification.
How do you feel about the overall image of your government? I'm not going to go through all the boo-boos, the cabinet changes and all the rest of it, but you did have a bad time for a long while there.
We had a bad time, but we've come out of it. With the new budget, I'll tell you, the response has been very good. I think people now are beginning to realize the real different direction that this government is taking in getting a hold of government spending, being good fiscal managers, reducing the debt, increasing business confidence.
I'm just trying to think of something that was outstanding in the budget, and I just can't think of anything right off the top of my head, and I covered the budget now with Michael Wilson.
Sure, but the biggest thing was bringing down the deficit. I think that in the long term, in the direction that we're going by 1990, 1991, we'll only be borrowing about $11 billion.
Did you carry the message back to Eastern Canada that while they've got 5.6% unemployment in Toronto, 8% in Ontario, we're told we only have 12.8, but I suspect it's much higher. Do they appreciate the agony that we're going through in British Columbia right now, even with Expo on our doorstep?
Yes, I'll tell you, our BC caucus, we are preaching that all the time. We set up a little subcommittee on economic development for the province, and we're trying to pull together, projects, what we should be doing. The Prime Minister, of course, was out here a couple of weeks ago, and the message was made very clear to him when he was out here. And I see an increasing recognition of the need to do something for BC and, of course, the Maritimes.
I've just been told that there are 20 people on the waiting list for on-the-job training right now in this area compared to everyone that gets in. You'll have to increase it 20-fold.
Sure. Well, the program will be continuing. This just got started, don't forget, about January of this year, and the funds are continuing into the next fiscal year, so there'll be a lot more programs coming
What do you
up.
think of your new Tory MP for Capilano, Mary Collins? And she's going to talk a bit, too, about something else, another place she's been after the break. Where's the picture about? Have you got that picture? Mary Collins MP is just back from Ethiopia. Why were you there?
We went on behalf of the minister to look at our aid programs, whether or not they're effective, the resettlement issue, and what should be our Canadian policies in the future. And I'll tell you, it was an experience which has really changed me. It was very, very emotional, very dramatic.
Where were you?
In Ethiopia. Originally in Addis, and then we went up to the north in the drought-affected areas, and then down to the southern part of the country where people are being moved into resettlement areas.
Is it peaceful in the country? I mean, there used to be all these American planes, British planes, Russian planes flying in. Is the food crisis now virtually over for the moment?
No, it's not.
And but I thought they'd got rains.
They had rains last year, but the people didn't have the capability in some areas of cultivating the land because they'd lost their oxen, they'd lost their farm implements. And it's a long-term problem. It didn't happen in 1 year either.
Are we doing anything effective, we as Canadians?
Yes, we are. I was so proud to be a Canadian. David McDonald was with us, who has been the coordinator, and he has done a fantastic job. We were given access to areas that no other people had gone into before. We had a 2-hour meeting with Chairman Mengistu, who is the head of state. We met with the senior ministers responsible for
What
all
are we
the different
doing
areas.
there, actually? Are we supplying tools or food or seed?
We've been supplying food, and we have been involved in one of the resettlement areas indirectly with Irish Concern, the group that's in there that is doing an excellent job. We met a young Canadian girl from Perth who is a nurse working in that particular camp. We met WUSC, World University Service, they're involved there, Save the Children, Hope International.
And well, not that it matters, but they do know it's Canadian stuff, or don't
Oh, Canada is, you say you're a Canadian, and you're a hero over there.
So you would advocate not cutting our overseas aid, as your government has just done, but pushing it back up again?
It's a real thing of, I feel, Canadian people helping Ethiopian people, not just through governments, that's part of it, but it's part of us as individuals having that sense of helping other people.
How long were you there?
6 days.
Go ahead, please, to Mary Collins.
Good morning, Jack.
Morning.
Listen, I have a statement and a question for Mary. Okay, the statement is, I spent a few years in the military, and most of the kids coming in, and I shouldn't say most of them, but the ones that had the real sound characters and the good attitudes, coincidentally had gone through the Capilano program. And I think rather than just trying to get somebody a job, like the old me, these guys were spending a lot of time in the community and doing a lot for those folks, and I think the government never got a bigger bang for its buck. Now, when I ask for Mary is, I'm in her constituency, and I'd like to see that, I think maybe if each of these MPs could chip maybe $10,000 off their $70,000 or $80,000 salaries and put it to real good use.
Are you prepared to take $10,000 off your salary for youth unemployment? He's asking you most brutally.
Well, I'm afraid I couldn't quite do that. I try to contribute through a variety of charitable organizations. Sure, Capilano was good, but we're trying to do some of the same things in helping young people develop those skills in our other job entry programs.
Go ahead, please.
Hello?
That's you.
I just want to say to Mary that it's a pleasure to have her down in Ottawa. She adds to the television coverage, but don't let this guy, Hebert, get away with blackmail. He's only a liberal. Let him die.
Thank you, sir.
Well, you know what I feel? I hope his family, I really feel badly about them, what they must be going through, and I just hope Senator Hebert recognizes the pain that he will be causing for them.
Well, I wouldn't in any way, shape, or form reflect it or approve of that. There is a little nagging doubt in my mind that hunger striking is not the way to change the democratic process.
Because then there's no end to it.
Go ahead, please.
That's I.
That's you, ma'am.
Oh, good. What a dreadful thing to say, let him die. I mean, I have compassion for the man, but the point is this. He reminds me of the mother-in-law, who had kept house for 50 years, and suddenly there's the young bride who's trying something new, and the mother-in-law says, no, that's not the way to do it. Great big struggle, dreadful sort of confrontations, which are totally unnecessary. And I just wish Senator Hebert would take his $250 robe and go sleep in his bed and let the bride, being the Tories, try it out. I mean, it's not. He's the type who says, "I'm all for progress. It's all these bloody changes I hate." Bye-bye.
That's a very interesting comment.
Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Jack.
Morning.
Yeah, I just want to say something about manpower. In Vancouver here, there's a restaurant out in Coquitlam, and the guy lost a couple of girls who went on leave somewhere for waitressing, and he went to full manpower to ask if they could send a couple of girls, and manpower wanted to know how much the girls were making, which was $5, which is pretty good wage for a waitress for a girl, and they wanted to know how much they were making in tips, and so he wouldn't tell them that, so they won't send him any girls. I want you to know that anyway.
Well, if you get the guy to phone me himself, I'll phone manpower about it.
Yeah, okay then.
Sure. Much obliged. I mean, that's just stupid if somebody in manpower said that. Go ahead, please. If they did. Good morning.
To the minister. Does she realize that 20% of the young people, before they can get a job, has to be in the presence for 4 years? Is the government willing to pay 4 years for there to be a mechanic, a plumber, electrician, whatever, all those things have to have a 4-year before you can get a license to work.
Well, they don't all have to have a 4-year, but there are manpower training programs which I think are eligible for some people.
That's right, under some. But other kinds of things we're training people for. There's a automotive aftercare program that I'm aware of, and it's young people involved in the parts departments of automotive companies, learning some of the skills.
That's one
inventory.
of your job training ones,
yeah,
is it?
Yeah, and an area where they'd never had women before, and there are young women involved in those programs and doing it very well, as well as some handicapped people.
Go ahead, please.
Am I up?
Yes, ma'am.
I would like to know why they don't make that program go into the school on their grade 12 or that.
You mean start it in the high school?
Yeah, start it in the high school, where then when they come out, they'll have some a place to go.
On the job training. Well, presumably the purpose of the school is to train them broadly anyway.
That's right, and that hopefully when you get out of school, you either go into some post-secondary education, you look for a job. If you can't get it and you don't have any other kinds of skills, you may qualify to go into some other kind of a job training
But the
program.
outlook is pretty bleak for people at the moment, is it not?
Here in British Columbia, in parts of British Columbia, and that's why we've got to get some other kinds of economic activity going here that are going to help create those jobs, and why we're trying to create an economic environment in which the private sector can flourish. Small business,
We're hearing that
service
so
sector.
much. It's the private sector that's going to turn the wheels of industry. I wish it would move a bit quicker. Go ahead, please.
Good morning.
Morning. That's you. Go ahead.
Yeah, good morning.
Morning.
Mrs. Collins, I live in your riding. And there's a couple of points I'd like to make. You mentioned that you got great response from the North Shore newspaper regarding coming back with your money to help out this city of ours. There was a training program that got publicized where there was $74,000 handed out to train 4 people for plumbing. The same course was ran last year for 15 people, and not one of the 15 people was offered a job afterwards. Not one, not even the top passing student in the class.
How do you know that, by the way?
Oh, I have my facts.
So in other words, it trained 15 people that didn't produce one single job.
And not one. And they weren't even offered a job.
Well, one of the...
They were at Capilano College in training.
Okay, one of the differences with the new programs is that they're a combination of training and on-the-job experience. So the sponsors of the programs, they go out and get employers and to take the students for a period of, it varies, 8 or 10 weeks, they go back for training. So the employers have that experience with the students, and that's what I think is important.
Do the employers pay them at all?
No, not during the training period.
They're covered by their training allowances. They're covered by their training allowance. They're not paid by the employer. Right. So he's getting some trainee labor, you might say.
Yeah, and they've got to have a program for them as well.
I wonder if he's right, though. You've got 4 training for plumbing this year, $74,000. Will they get jobs?
I would hope so. I mean, I can't guarantee it at this point, but that's the whole objective.
Thanks for pointing that out.
The second point.
Go on.
The second point that I have is I heard it mentioned on the news broadcast from Ottawa that the federal minister for youth employment doesn't have any money in her budget. Then what are we paying her for?
Okay, the money...
Let's take the money off of her and perhaps give that to Senator Hebert and let the guy go sleep in his bed.
Fair enough. Who is she again?
Madam Champagne, but she is a
She's
minister...
only got an office and no staff.
A Minister of State to the Minister of Employment. So the budget is in the Minister of Employment's budget, and she then focuses specifically on those programs affecting youth.
Let's do another segment with Mary Collins after the break. Jobs for youth. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Jack.
Morning.
Good morning, Mary Collins.
Good morning.
You were on the Equality for All Committee.
That's right.
And you made recommendations about immigration. And Mr. Crosby is recommending that they be developed into legislation. Now, one of the recommendations, or one of the things you found, was that a landed immigrant in this country who was so well off in his homeland would find it a disadvantage to apply for Canadian citizenship should nevertheless be given certain rights that are now restricted to Canadian citizens, and more specifically, the right to sponsor and bring into Canada his parents, whatever their age, or whether or not they could work. And of course, you'll understand that under the law, they in turn could bring with them all of their dependent children or unmarried children under 23 at date of entry,
under 23,
without any consideration or regard of any kind for their capacity of any of them to successfully establish in Canada.
Well, don't let me lose your issue there. What you're saying then, that under the Equality for All report, which has not yet been translated into law, has it?
That's right.
It recommends that certain categories of landed immigrants be given rights to which they're not normally entitled, to bring in their families and their siblings and their dependent children. That's crazy,
okay,
Mary.
Let me just give the rundown to that. First of all, landed immigrants who have been here for 3 years already have certain rights to bring in their parents.
No, they've
with
become...
a restriction. No, of a certain age. If their parents are over a certain
They can bring
age.
in their wives and children, but not their...
No, they can. They can sponsor. They can sponsor their parents if their parents are over a certain age.
Not until they're Canadian citizens.
No, even as landed immigrants, they can after 3 years. We had recommended that the same criteria apply for landed immigrants who had been here for 3 years, with no restrictions in terms of sponsoring their parents based on age. That really comes back to Section 15 of the Charter. Section 15 of the Charter, as you know, says that you cannot discriminate on the basis of age, sex, race, citizenship, nationality. And we were looking at it saying, okay, what is the implication of that? What laws could be challenged under Section 15? And that was one of the laws that we felt could be challenged because it discriminated.
But you're losing sight of the basic problem, which my friend has pointed out. A landed immigrant will be able to bring in on the family reunification everybody and anybody endlessly on the old pyramid. Is that right?
No,
Charlie?
that's not right.
Oh, yes, it is right.
He or she would be able to bring in their parents under a sponsorship arrangement.
That's right, and their parents in turn would bring in all their dependent children under 23 at date of entry without regard, and this is important, without regard of any kind for their capacity to contribute to our society or to successfully establish here.
Okay, but there still has to be a sponsorship arrangement for the parents. The children have to be financially responsible for them.
Who has decided not to accept the responsibilities of citizenship in this country, and that's what citizenship is all about. It's about responsibility. And this person has decided he's not going to accept those responsibilities.
Yeah.
Is now being given the right to bring in his parents, whatever their age or whether or not they can work, which are the words set out in your report, and they in turn can bring in their children regardless of their capacity to contribute to our society.
Okay, hold it there and I'll put the question bluntly to Mary. Is it not a fact, Mary Collins, that in view of the massive unemployment from which we suffer, that the wholesale family reunification program puts far too great a burden on our health and other services to tolerate at this moment? Everyone wants immigrants without discrimination as to their capacity to enter Canada. Are we not overdoing it from the point of view of the load on our social services?
Well, there's two different points of view on that.
What's your point of view?
Well, I think that if we look in terms of the population growth in this country, it's very low through natural growth, and that we can accommodate increased immigration in order to provide a growing population, which we need for all sorts of reasons, economic base and consumer goods. There still are requirements with respect to medical health. People have to be in good health. They have to pass the requirements for that before they're allowed to enter, even if they are parents. In fact, there have been a lot of complaints about the system that's used in that respect, and that it keeps out a lot of people with perhaps minor health problems. So that I'm not deeply disturbed.
Anyway, you
by that.
approve of these recommendations?
Sure. I was part of the committee.
What you're saying is that you're endorsing a situation and a policy which is sponsored, which is approved by all parties, that under our immigration plan, the regulations are so worded to give overwhelming advantage to those least able to accommodate to our society.
No, I don't agree with that at all. I think the whole Immigration Act is to promote certainly family reunification, which I think is humanitarian.
You get a hold of the Auditor General's report for 1982 and read the section on immigration. And if you read that, you will learn that our regulations are so written as to give the overwhelming advantage to those least able to accommodate to our society, and I think you should read that.
Thank you. It's a tough issue, that
it
one,
is a
because
very
it's an issue
tough
everyone's too kind of nice Nelly to raise.
Well, no, it's raised a lot, I'll tell you.
I object to landed immigrants who are not Canadian citizens having an edge on unification.
They don't have an edge.
Oh, but they do have an edge.
No, they don't. They're dealt with the same way as a Canadian citizen, so there's no discrimination.
And I'm going to disagree with you.
Okay.
Canadian citizens should all have the same rights, but people who don't take out citizenship should not have the same rights. Said he?
Yeah.
Dogmatically. Go ahead, please.
Hello. Returning to the problem of youth unemployment, I was wondering if I can draw some comment from this conservative minister on...
Member. She's not a minister yet.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, this conservative
Who
MP
knows?
on the social credit government's educational policies, cutting back student financial aid and that policy's effect on reducing accessibility to education and training, which it's recognized by everyone in the education system is one of the best ways to improve people's employability.
You're asking about the social credit educational policies.
I'd like to know what she if she has some statement to make.
Yeah.
No, I would not comment on a provincial government's policies. That would be,
You mean because of social credit? If it was NDP, you'd comment on it.
No, I think that's their responsibility. Through the federal government, we certainly are involved in giving financial aid to students. I think it's a very important program, the loans
Certainly,
program.
that's the only financial aid we get because the only amount of money they ever turn over is roughly equivalent to the federal transfer payments earmarked for that purpose.
Well, we're just getting into that whole area of the federal transfers for health and education, and
to
I'm
make
involved
sure
in that,
it's
yes.
applied to the right corners. Last call. Go ahead, please.
I think the Prime Minister would be seen to be a bigger and better man if he was to send for the Senator along with John Turner and tell him why they can't support his program and maybe ask him to give some advice. I think he's lost an awful lot of credibility over this thing.
Who has, Mulroney or Hébert?
Mulroney. I think the young people are coming out now against the Mulroney government.
See, that's interesting. I think
I really think from a democratic point of view, Mulroney doesn't have to give way to him. He just has to send for him in a gentlemanly sort of way, explain to him there's no way they can go along with the senators.
Well, I think that's probably a very good
I think
point.
that's a very good point.
My thanks to Mary Collins, MP for Capilano. We'll argue out that landed immigrant thing again sometime. Prove to me I'm wrong.
Okay, I'll be
say
delighted
that there's
to do that.
discrimination against Canadian citizens.
Okay, and we'll see you tonight.
Oh, tonight, yes. My thanks to Mary Collins. Next, my very old friend of this last 30, 35 years, Glen McDonald, after the break.
Yeah, just under 8.
It was 9 years ago when Was went, eh?
Yeah.
Jeez, God. I'll never forget that night. I think there was a dinner on with
He dropped dead in front of it, didn't he?
Gordon Gibson, wasn't it?
$20.
Aye, yeah, some kind of a thing. I don't know.
And
what
I
the-
told him he was dead.
When I got into the thing, my concern was poison, you know. I mean, what do you
Yeah.
think in a hotel Vancouver? You can't do much better than that.
We'll not talk about that.
No.
Many's the inquest I've covered in the old building down beside the police station when Glen McDonald was the coroner for 26 years. And he started a number of things down there that were never done before, and I hope they're done since. And one of those things was specialized juries. Right, Glen?
Yes, we did. We tried to figure, based on the theory that a jury of 6 multiplied by any number of people multiplied by intelligence produces intelligence, but it didn't work that way. So we tried to get, when you're getting into industrial fatalities, somebody from management, somebody from labor, and balance them off 3 and 3. It's better that they can ask the sensible questions.
Is it true, Glen McDonald, that on an occasion when you were once investigating a heroin addict's death on Skid Road, you got some drug addicts on the jury, and after the jury had finished their deliberations, when the cleaners went to sweep up, they found a couple of needles?
It's not only true, but the drug addict was the foreman of the jury. So it made it all the more realistic. But nevertheless, our peers had been heard from, and perhaps that was the deceased peer. I don't know.
I want to go to one of your famous cases, because it got great page 1 coverage in Vancouver, and that was the death of Errol Flynn, Was he the most important guy who ever died? Well, the best known body you ever had in the morgue?
Oh, I would say by an arm and a leg, certainly, because there were phone calls coming in from London, from Rome, from Hollywood, Los Angeles, all over the world. Hong Kong, Australia, of course, because he hailed from Port Darwin, I believe. And you say the most identifiable, well, certainly, and he still is. You can still catch him on the late night with that swashbuckling style and so forth.
How did he die in Vancouver? Was he at a party or something?
Oh, he'd been up with his friend Georgie Caldo in British Properties, and I believe Georgie was trying to purchase the Zaka, which was a 3 or 4 masted schooner sailboat, which was lying down in Kingston, Jamaica. The deal never went through, and in the end, Flynn and his girlfriend, Beverly Adlam, were on the car when Georgie was driving them to the airport to pick up United Airlines down to Hollywood. And on the way, he wasn't feeling well, so they went into the Sylvia Hotel to see the house doctor, who was Dr. Grant Gould. But unfortunately, he was leaving his office and said, come up to my apartment. I'll meet you there, which was just a few blocks down the road on the way to the airport. And there, Flynn recovered a bit, and apparently for 2 or 3 hours regaled him with stories of his life. And this was just after he'd written that book, My Wicked, Wicked Ways, and I'm sure it was
Oh, that was the book in which he... Oh, no, somebody accused him of being some kind of political subversive at one time.
Well, that was his book. He was the author of Wicked, Wicked Ways, but the only difficulty was that he went in to lie down on Dr. Gould's bed, and Gould went in and found him dead, and in the end whistled him up to St. Paul's, where they certified him officially dead because he was a well-known personality. And suddenly my telephone started to ring, both front and back, from all over the world. Is it true? And then, is it true? What did he die from? So in the end, I got a hold of Dr. Harmon, and I said, we've got to do an autopsy and find out how this man has come to his death in this little city called Vancouver. And so away we go with the autopsy, and was done right away. And the usual thing for a man who's lived well and hard at myocardial infarction, coronary thrombosis, fatty degeneration of the liver, and so on, but nothing out of the way.
Was Beverly, in other words, he died of drinking too much?
Well, that's another way of putting it, certainly.
Was Beverly Adlam, his young girlfriend, with him at the time when he died?
She was with him in the car and at Grant Gould's apartment, but she didn't come down and identify the body. We were left at, matter of fact, we weren't too sure who his next of kin were. We knew there were 2 or 3, maybe 4 wives on the horizon, but just how far down they were, we didn't know.
Was it a struggle over possession of the body at one time?
Well, there was an argument that whatever we did by way of autopsy, they were going to do another one down in Hollywood. It was then Patrice Wymore turned up to be the, well, we thought was the wife, and I think she still was. But they did another autopsy down there, and they were going to do one in California. We never heard anything more about that. Our autopsy was obviously accepted, but at the meantime, of course, as you find in the book, Dr. Harmon was going down to give a lecture to the Pacific Northwest Pathology, and he showed a tremendous interest in what were VD warts involving Flynn. Well, now, there was a story I finally got out from Port Darwin, Australia, is when they found him for the movie Captain Blood. That's where he was literally picked up. He would always, white men down there never chased the Aboriginal, all except Flynn. Flynn used to love going out in the outback and where the Aborigines were.
He was a rounder.
And he was a rounder. And in those days, they used to use that potassium permanganate, that blue with a big long needle in the rear end, and that's how they were cured of VD and so forth. But Harmon's intrigued with the VD warts, and I said, no way is that got anything to do with his death and so on. But I came back in a little way after my many numerous phone calls, and there was a bottle of formaldehyde, which something looked like the warts were in there, and I said, Tom, we got to put them back.
You mean they had removed specimens from his body?
Well, just for testing, for biological, toxicological examination. We take blood, liver, kidney, brain, urine, and so forth.
So what did you do before you sent the body back?
Well, we got some Scotch tape and put the VD warts back on where they
Glen
belong.
McDonald, I never thought in all my years of broadcasting I would tell such a story on the air, but facts are facts and they must be told. That's quite a story. It's a very good book, and it gives a lot of the flavor of the kind of relationship that people like thee and me and Wasserman and Moyer and Simmerholt
Eddie Moyer,
and
yes,
Gar McPherson
Ray Monroe, if you want to name another one.
I didn't want to mention that name at
didn't.
all. But those days have now gone.
Oh, I think they're gone, yes. Maybe it's as well, but that's why I did it. If I didn't have that excellent secretary of mine, Winnie Davis, that saved all the newspaper clippings, I couldn't have put it all together and tied 26 years together.
And assistance from our old friend and colleague, John Kirkwood.
Oh, yes, Kirkwood, the courier there. He did all the typing part. And,
Next, I've got more questions to ask the inimitable Glen McDonald, coroner for the whole of British Columbia. You were the supervising coroner eventually, were you not?
Yeah, we had about 140 odd coroners in BC at the time.
And a murder investigation after the break. Once a time when a colleague of mine was arrested and charged with murder by arsenical poisoning, as I recalled, and he had been well known in Vancouver as the Maharaja of Allahabad. The Maharaja was his nom de plume for some promotions he did in the stores. And I remember thinking that the inquest you conducted in the Castellani case before charges were laid was pretty brutal. You were looking for hearsay, any kind of evidence whatsoever, and I always felt, while skilled and competent and admirable though you are, that you were really rough in the Castellani inquest.
Well, we take hearsay on hearsay, but once you're into arsenic, and I had to look up some old books around 1890 and 1902 where the English arsenic cases were being held, and the cases were coming out that a husband and wife in the sugar pot would have the arsenic mixed with the sugar, and then finally he would give her the extra dose of arsenic and say, it can't be that she took arsenic poison, test me. And he's got arsenic as well. Every human being's got a certain amount of arsenic on their person.
For a long while after Castellani's wife died in the General Hospital, there had been no suspicion of poison, had there? How did the suspicions arise?
They did every test there was, except they didn't do heavy metals tests. Now they're doing that routinely, but Dr. Barney Moscovich was his attending physician. She couldn't eat. She was having all the symptoms of a heart condition and so on. And that is where we finally found out that Rene was bringing in the milkshakes every other day for his wife over a period of 6 or 7 months.
Let me set the scene for that. At that particular time, Rene Castellani was involved in a radio station promotion and was sitting on the top of the Beaumac Tower to sell a certain number of cars. Now, if you're sitting on the top of the Beaumac Towers, how could he be giving milkshakes with arsenic to his wife in the General Hospital?
That was one of the circumstantial bits of evidence that showed us what had gone on, because the 2 weeks he was up there, after we disinterred his wife Esther Castellani, they found down in the toxicological lab, both here and in Toronto, that there was 2 weeks, the hair grows about a centimeter a month on a woman of her age, where there was no arsenic in the hair at all for that period of time. Now, it can only be that whoever was feeding her the arsenic, or it could be one of many things, but whoever was feeding the arsenic wasn't doing it in that period of time. So they were able to sort of come in by simple compilation and find out that that was the 2 weeks that Rennie was atop of Beaumac talking to the seagulls on a radio station and selling cars.
In other words, the strands of hair would show toxicologically ingestions of arsenic up to point A and then starting again from point B, covering by the measurement a 2-week vacation from the arsenical injections.
And during that time, of course, he stayed up there, remained up there all of this time. Then, further investigation, we found triox, which they used to sell for herbicides in the basement there, in the shelf, which you buy at any garage station and whatnot. And that has arsenic, of course, as its base. And then things went on from there. Then we found out that he had also had a girlfriend, and he'd gone ahead and signed that he was a single man, and they were going to purchase a home between them. Now, at the time, his wife was still very much alive, but that was done with a notary public out at Port Moody somewhere.
In other words, you had a motive.
Well, the motive, obviously,
suspicious
circumstances. Just who would do it, because certainly you can't be that long in Vancouver General Hospital. But Moscovich did get from Rene permission to have an autopsy performed. And they did the autopsy at Vancouver General Hospital. And they, unbeknownst to me, because it was not the coroner's case at all, as far as I was concerned. At that time, they sent the specimens down to Ted Fennell and to Eldon Rideout and Mel Yip, and they ran it through. And the next call I get is from Dr. Laurie Ranta, the medical director of the Vancouver General Hospital at the time, saying, Glenn, we got a report back here. There's arsenic in this patient, Esther Castellani. I said, well, what do you mean arsenic? It can't be. Where's she? Well, she said, as far as I know, she's buried. So then the next stop was to get under the Coroner's Act. We had the power to exhume, and next morning we went out and picked her out. Mind you, we had to clean all the earth away so we didn't contaminate the arsenic and all the rest of it. There was all kinds of instructions we had to go through.
Now, just to sum up on that, and this is the kind of mystery writers or mystery bugs question. Had Castellani got rid of the triox, would it have, underneath the kitchen cupboard in the house, would that have prevented a conviction?
I think it would have. I think so. Because what else do we have? You just have another step in the
If he'd thrown away the triox, he would never have been found guilty of murder.
That's exactly it. Circumstantial evidence must be consistent with guilt and inconsistent with any other rational conclusion. And there's another rational conclusion, that she got the arsenic by mistake in the hospital or something.
Or in some other way.
Or in some other way, but not me.
That was, I think, do you feel like that it was your inquest which brought forward the evidence and led to his eventual conviction?
The prosecutor of the day, of course, was Stuart McMorrin. He was the prosecutor, not Crown Counsel, and he had all of the evidence that we had, but he said there's not enough to lay a charge. Well, I said, if you don't, well, then I'll go ahead with an inquest. And needless to say, with the Italian community and so on, it was a very popular inquest, standing room only.
Well, I know.
And then when the verdict came in, homicide due to arsenic poisoning, well, then McMorrin had to move. I think that's when they decided to lay the charge.
And put the heat on it.
And put the heat.
I can't remember what year that was. It must have been 20-odd years ago.
About 20-odd years ago, yeah.
Glen McDonald, I have a few more questions for him, and you may have some questions for him, too, after the break.
Plus for the wife.
A couple of other questions to Glen McDonald. You're now in happy, relaxed retirement, Glen, right?
Well, I paid my $1,000 to the Law Society to get a certificate, just in case. But I think it'll be finished by the end of the year.
Now, we are now in the process of organizing a transplant bank in British Columbia. Again, in the form of, say, Stuart McMorrin. Is it not a fact that long ago you organized an informal transplant bank from cadavers in the coroner's office long in advance of today's indecision?
Yes, I came back from our National Coroner Seminar and Association, which we have, and I'd heard what they've been doing there and also what they've been doing in Russia. And we always had cornea transplants, the eye transplant. That was so obvious. We just needed the certificate or something on a driver's license or consent. But most of the time we had no consent because nobody knew who it was. And in those cases, sometimes we looked the other way. But we did consent to the transplant. Now, as far as kidneys and as far as livers were concerned, of course, they hadn't come that way. But the one thing I've always maintained we could be doing in this country, now perhaps AIDS is not going to help it, and that is cadaver blood. There should never be a shortage of blood in a country such as North America, Canada.
Let's take that in two segments. You're saying that informally somebody would close their eye, figuratively speaking, if a cornea was needed for an eye improvement and the body was unidentified and the eye was good, it would quietly be used.
Yes, yes.
Never got into trouble over that?
No, the eye was sutured up and there was never any question. That was always the way. And,
Good common sense.
And as a matter of fact, when time did come out, because most of the undertakers would hardly even be aware of it. But the point was we did that. Now, as far as the blood was concerned, in Russia, there's never a shortage of blood in Russia because they use their cadaver blood. Now, subject to AIDS, subject to hepatitis and all these other things you can be concerned about, but still, there is no shortage such as you have here now and again.
And you would recommend that with the proper tests as a perfectly proper system for blood banks?
For the blood bank, yes, because there's plenty of blood. But why shouldn't my blood be used? If the principle of being a donor is true, then continue.
Use the blood. I don't know. It just sticks in my throat a little bit somehow.
I feel the same way. But on the other hand, if I needed blood, I think I'd have a different feeling in my throat.
Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Jack.
Morning.
How are you this morning?
Good.
I just want to comment on your Dr. Glen McDonald. I think he's a wonderful person. I've been here pretty well all my life, and in that book, it sure brings back a lot of old memories. And you tell him that once I got his book, I couldn't put it down until it was finished. And I just hope in the future that when he writes another book, he makes it a little longer.
How much is this? How much is it, Glenn?
I don't know. I think if you look around...
I think it's about $13.95.
Oh, $12.95. It says on the back here $12.95.
It's reasonable. That's kind of you. I tried to make it longer, but that took 3 or 4 years, and it takes a long time to put these things together, even with the great help I had from Kirkwood.
Well, I tell you, Dr. Glen McDonald, I would certainly take your pointers.
Good, and there's another...
Your experiences and everything else, because by golly, we need good men like you, and it's a shame you have to retire.
Thank you. Listen, there's another great story on there about which there are many kind of unsubstantiated rumors. The Mount Slessy air crash.
Right.
Was that where there were supposedly some U.S. Treasury agents and some other people?
There was a
Chinese agents
yes.
with lots of money on board when it hit the mountain?
$60,000 or $70,000 depended on the rumor. And this Chinese gentleman had left Hong Kong. He went there to purchase something, didn't go through with the deal, and came back from Hong Kong to Vancouver here. And there he got on the North Star and went up. And that was actually after they had that Shriner football game. That's where the Saskatchewan team lost practically all their
whole of the team
practically. And yes, he was there. And we did find a lot of small bills on the side of the mountaintop. But the truth or not, the FBI said yes, he was known to be carrying this amount of money and was coming back to New York after he landed in Toronto.
And there was somebody following him on the plane.
And somebody was following him on the plane, and also we never did find out, all we ever found human remains was, this was not until August, it went down in November, December, but was one bit of an ankle sticking out of a shoe. That's the only human remains we found. You'd find a Merlin engine, the length of this table, compressed into the size of a little mandarin orange box.
Where it hit the mountain?
Where it hit the mountain. 75 feet higher, 75 feet further over, it'd have been over the valley and down. It wouldn't have mattered.
The Mount Slessy crash in which the football team was killed. That was quite a story. Go ahead from Kelowna.
Mr. Webster, thank you. I listened last night when you announced that you were having a Mr. Glen McDonald as your guest this morning, and I'm so grateful sincerely because I would like to ask a question directly to Mr. McDonald. Where was he on August the 22nd of 1944 at 5:17 p.m. precisely?
I was navigating officer on the aircraft carrier HMS Nabob, and I just made out our position reports for the next 6 hours when we were torpedoed and immediately sunk. Our draft aft was 46 feet and our draft forward was 6 feet, and we staggered back for 3 or 4 knots to Scapa Flow, some 14 days away. Am I right on that?
You were the fine gentleman who indeed brought me back safely.
Oh, thank you very much. We had a mutual interest in that one.
We surely did, and I thank you for it, and I'm tingling with emotion.
That's fantastic.
Thank you so much.
Did the Nabob go down, or did you get it back to Scapa Flow?
We got her back to Recyth, and we had 23 bodies still down below, and we got them out. We took all the booze out of the wardroom there was left because the undertakers refused to do the job, so we had to go down, and you can imagine what it was like in those conditions. I think that's how I learned to be a coroner, maybe.
Yeah, to recover the bodies of your shipmates.
Then the Nabob sailed over to Holland and then was refitted and came back, and still keeping the name Nabob, came back here as a West German freighter. And I went on board here, and there was the same old ship.
What was your rank then, Glenn?
Lieutenant.
Lieutenant in the Royal Canadian Navy?
Yeah, RCNR.
RCNR.
And I treasure the picture that I have of Glen McDonald in front of the Nabob in Vancouver, I believe at La Pointe Pier, along with the treasure that I have from the Edmonton Journal as a survivor of the HMS Nabob.
Yes, that was the occasion when the Nabob came home.
Well, thank you very much for your call.
Thank you, Mr. Webster, and good luck on your new edition. Thank you, Mr. McDonald.
Thank you.
That's good. That takes you back a long time, doesn't it? 44, 86, that's 42 years ago.
We were on the strike on the Tirpitz at the time with the 10th Cruiser Squadron out of Scapa Flow.
The Tirpitz.
Well, that was the one that...
You remember, she was a pocket battleship.
Yeah, and she actually had been sunk by the Germans, but we didn't know it. Our intelligence was all wrong, but we were flying off Avengers and Wildcats trying to get it.
Sink the Tirpitz.
Sink the Tirpitz.
She was in a fjord.
Yeah, way up in that fjord, Narvik Fjord, I think it was called, someplace.
Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Jack. A while back, you had an author that wrote a book about a society murder in Shaughnessy, and I'm just wondering if there's any more information from your guests about...
Oh, not Madeline Smith. What was her name? Janet Smith.
Janet Smith.
That's before Glenn's time, I think.
Oh, he couldn't throw any more light on it for it, could he?
I believe that was about 1922 or 23.
It was.
A long time back. I believe, I may be wrong on this, it was a party, and I believe they charged the Chinaman or the cook.
Charged the Chinese fellow who was kidnapped by Scottish societies, chained to a bed in Franklin Street, tortured and beaten about to get him to confess falsely to a murder which he did not do. It's an incredible story. In fact, Pamela Martin still got my copy of the book, and Pamela, I want it back again. What light? Well, I can't see it. It's round the wrong way. There are days and there are days. Go ahead, please.
Good morning.
Morning.
Dr. McDonald, you said that Stuart McMorrin was the prosecutor in the Rennie Castellani case.
Yes.
I was wondering, wasn't Sam Toy involved in that?
Oh, I think this is before Sam Toy's time.
No, it wouldn't be before Sam Toy, but Sam was a lawyer then. Mr. Justice Toy.
He's now Mr. Justice Toy, but no. I don't think he was prosecutor at the time, but shortly thereafter. Actually, Stuart McMorrin, subsequently, not very long afterwards, when they were putting in the Crown Counsel concept, left the role and became a county court judge.
Yeah.
I think he is now, or a Supreme Court judge.
No, he's a county court judge in New Westminster.
New Westminster, yeah.
Sorely missed in his capacity as Crown Counsel and prosecutor from the point of view of the old boys like me. Go ahead, please.
Oh, good morning, Jack, and good morning, Glenn. I know John Kirkwood, and sort of had a sneak preview of your book because I took photocopies of a draft for John. I was wondering if you'd tell the listeners a little about a really bizarre case where a lady was found hanging on a doorknob inside an empty room, and later you proved that it was murder, even though it seemed apparently suicide at the time.
Well, I'm afraid we'll have to leave that in the limbo of the unknown. Is it in the book, that story?
Yes, it is. And it took place in Shaughnessy, and the lady who allegedly did the crime is doing time now, or maybe out on parole.
That is correct.
Know.
Well, my thanks to, I keep wanting to say Commander McDonald. Did you rise in rank eventually?
Oh, I did, yeah, ultimately. None of my crimes were found,
It's
and
great
they
reading.
promoted me.
It's a great reading. How Come I'm Dead by Glen McDonald. And I'll be back after the break. Well, tonight I've got to go to a big Canadian club dinner, and tomorrow I'm going to have some mystery guests, but I'll give you a little hint. At least a couple of them are from my great friends in the Eastern Media Mafia. 9 a.m. precisely.
Expo 86, 37 days to go.